Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Houston Element Podcast. My name is Missy, and I'm your host. And today, we're traveling back in time, bringing it to the future where it belongs. A little bit of LGBTQ history, a little bit of Club Kid history, a little bit of Houston nightclub history. And we have a veteran and a historian, activist, and one of the original founding members of the Club Kid nightclub scene here in Houston, the one and only Mark Ghost Stevens.
Hi, welcome, Missy. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about the chance to discuss the history of the Club Kids. Houston Club Kids haven't had very much of a history shown, so I'm excited to get that out there, of course, with my upcoming memoir, The Last Club Kid.
Thank you again also so much for joining us and being one of our first, LGBTQ Club Kid activists, historian of the Club Kid Houston nightclub scene. It is an honor to have you.
Thank you.
So for those that are not familiar, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I have came up through the Houston scene. I'm from the east side of Houston in Channelview, and grew up just a 15-minute drive from downtown, where basically I have grown up in the Houston area. I have recently written a memoir, and the memoir discusses my travels from Houston to Miami and New York, and the memoir basically goes over just how I became a club kid and my background being from the East Houston area.
Wonderful, wonderful. And yes, and correction, everyone, I forgot to include that Mr. Stevens is also a published author. You're going to be looking out for his new memoir, which we're going to be talking about today, The Last Club Kid. So can you tell us a little bit about that and what made you decide to write this memoir, to share it with the public?
Well, so I had always thought over the past 20 years or so, I had always thought, my goodness, I have a story to tell, and so it was always with me. And then my prior job that I had a lot of downtime from July to September, October. I had a lot of downtime at work, and so I just started doing it. I basically just sat down. I started structuring the stories and putting it together. And I shared some of those stories with some of my close friends and things. And when I found I was on the right track, and then that job ended and I had some more downtime. And so I thought, this has been with me all this time. So let's get it on paper. And so I just kind of did it.
So for those that aren't familiar, for generations now coming into progression, can you explain to some of the younger generation what is a club kid and why was it so important to our history? Not just night culture, but, civilian culture in general.
Yeah, so Keoki, and I know we're going to talk a little more about Keoki in a few minutes, but my personal relationship with DJ Keoki, the way that Keoki always told me, and this is directly from his mouth, is that, and some of this comes from history and my, background watching some of the documentaries, and I've gone back and refreshed myself. But in the late 80s, after the famous Andy Warhol passed away in New York, during the time of Ed Koch as the mayor, yes, and Andy Warhol is very well known, such a great artist. Well, there was a void after Studio 54, the legendary nightclub in New York. There was a void that needed to be filled. And during that time, there was a dance club that opened in New York called Danceteria. Danceteria was in an old cafeteria, and Madonna famously worked the elevator there. And so that's where Keoki tells me the story of that there was a movement from the late 80s to the early 90s of people who were in New York taking fashion school at Parsons School of Fashion, people who were there for music at Juilliard. So there was a movement of these late 80s artistic people who came together. They came together in the nightlife at Danceteria, and then of course Michael Alec came up and filled the role, the void that had previously been filled by Andy Warhol. So Michael, of course, recruited superstar DJ Keoki to be the DJ for the parties. And at one of his early parties, James St. James, one of the trust fund babies of the time, James St. James shows up to one of Michael's early parties and basically reads him and says, "You call this a party?" And that their partnership, from there, their partnership was born. And James St. James and the author of Disco Bloodbath, which was Party Monster, and the Club Kids were basically created out of the void from the 80s to the 90s. And then, of course, the rest is history.
Oh my goodness. So yeah, now and so you bringing up some of the legendary folks. Well, let's go down the list first of all. Let's talk about some of the legendary folks, about how your relationship with the legendary DJ Keoki. For those that don't know, can you explain to us about DJ Keoki and James St. James, Michael Alec? What made them important staples in the Club Kid revolution back in those days, specifically in New York, I understand.
Yeah, and so the fabric or the foundation of the Club Kid movement, of course, was the artistic style. It was performance art. If you're going to go out, and this is something that I asked Keoki recently when we had a conversation. I said, "Hey, so what is the Club Kids movement like now in New York currently?" He said, "Oh, Ghost, you wouldn't believe it. They wear the same outfit every week, and Michael Alec famously never wore the same outfit twice. So it was very creative. Michael, it was platform shoes. Right now, I am putting a few outfits together for my book signings and things, and so I have some custom platforms being made in the old Club Kid style." So platforms in the day back then were at least 6 inches elevated. You would take a pair of shoes, tennis shoes, you would take them to your local cobbler, your shoe guy or whatever, and you would tell them, "Hey, can you add some foam?" Or you would do it yourself. I know there were several times that I had attempted my creations, and I'm not very crafty, but the original Club Kids in New York were very much about the style. It was very superhero, very colorful, very unique. And then in Houston, in the Houston Club Kid movement, when I first went to heaven, and we're going to talk about that a little more in a minute, but my first exposure to Club Kids was at what is now called South Beach, which back in the 90s was called Heaven. Same location, different name, and we'll talk a little more about that, I know. But my first exposure to the Club Kids was the Houston Club Kids. But the New York Club Kids, the foundation of that, of course, I'll just throw out names here: Walt, Paper, Amanda Lepore. RuPaul is considered a Club Kid. The producers of RuPaul's Drag Race, Benton Bailey and Brandy Barbados, they are both original Club Kids. They were known as the Fabulous Pop-Tarts, and they released the song that is, I use those words for the title of my book, Money, Success, Fame, Glamour was their track. So, I'm going to leave someone out here. And Richie Rich was second generation Club Kid. Astro Earl is a Club Kid. And you can find a lot of pictures of them online. And then Joey Arias is one of my favorites. So there's, if you go back and you look at the Jenny Jones show, the Geraldo show, you can see them all in their glitz and glamour. Of course, the Michael Alec, the leader of the Club Kids, and then James St. James, his sidekick, and Keoki, the DJ for the Club Kids.
And so, as your Club Kid name is Ghost, and so can you tell us a little bit about how when Ghost came to be, and what was your inspiration for your Club Kid persona?
So I got the name at a rave in 93 or 94, my very first big rave in Dallas. I was at the rave with Amy Schultze and a group of friends, Frank and Brandon, so we were at this rave, and I was partaking in ecstasy that night. And so we were in line for the rave, and I talk about this scene in the book. And inside the rave, Amy told me, "You stay right here and you don't leave us." Well, I would disappear I would roam around this warehouse and then I would reappear. And when I would reappear, she turned around and she said, "Damn it, you're just like a ghost." So that's where the name came from. And then about 2 years later in Houston, I was watching the Club Kids of New York on the Jenny Jones show, and I thought, hey, I want to do that. So I just put together my first outfit. My first outfit was a jumpsuit with the gray piping that you put around pipes during the winter around my legs, with bungee cords, a metal a pipe over my head that with the letters Ghost. And I had been a clown when I was a kid. So I was able to, I still had the makeup and stuff. So I had a white face, and I always did a spiral on one side and a lightning bolt on the other. And that was just what I was inspired to do before Harry Potter or A Nightmare Before Christmas. But those were my trademarks: a spiral on one cheek and a lightning bolt. And I did a white face with glitter or eyelashes and stuff. And I went out, and that night was 96 at Rich's at Freak Fest. And that was the night that Ghost came out, and the reception to it was so well that I just built my club kid persona and everything from that point.
So you talked a little bit before when we were talking via email about how some of the legendary parties at what was heaven back then before it was South Beach, about the famous white parties, which was a very big party in the Houston club kids scene. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, so yeah, and that's the thing. The thing is that I when I became Ghost, there was a point there where I actually, to kind of correct the story here, I left Houston and went to South Beach, Florida, and
Okay.
became a promoter in Florida. And that's why I went to the white party in Florida. I became good friends with some of the local performers, Kitty Meow, Sean Palacios, who's a friend of mine to this day. So the white party, what I like to tell people is that, and this is kind of where our connection comes from. While I was in Miami, heaven burned down. So the club that is now South Beach, in October of 1996, the club that you all now know as South Beach was formerly Heaven. It burned down, and it was closed for about a year and a half while they rebuilt it and built what is now known as South Beach here in Houston. Well, I was in South Beach, Florida, just a few months after Versace had passed away. And so, I say there's a lot of ironic things that happened in my story. One of the biggest ironies is the fact that I was in South Beach. The club that I first went to and loved in Houston burned down, and then when it reopened, they named it South Beach. So that's kind of like one of those ironic things. But while I was in South Beach, for the year and a half that I was there working as a promoter and club kid, I was able to go to the white party, which was hosted by Paloma Picasso. Paloma, who was a drag queen, who was one of the first drag queens to be used in advertisements by Gianni Versace. She was one of the first males to have breast implants, and she would be dressed up and walking down Ocean Drive, and you would think that it was Jessica Rabbit. That's how gorgeous and beautiful
Wow.
it is.
Oh my God, gorgeous.
So my experience, of being in South Beach, and the stories that I talk about, the first season through the last season while I'm in South Beach in New York, I tell those fabulous tales of what it was like to be on Ocean Drive at the nightclubs there that were owned by friends of Madonna, at Liquid. I went to the club that was owned by Prince, Glam Slam. So all of those stories of me as Ghost interacting, in the club scene in Miami and New York, are the first part of the book. And of course, there's a bit of a pause there for the DEA raid, and I did wind up, going into probation and dealing with house arrest for a couple of years there. And then the second part of the book talks about the return of Ghost, and that's whenever I hit the scene in Houston with everything I learned from Miami and New York, and I go into being an actual nightclub promoter in Houston.
Oh my God. Now we talking to royalty, y'all. You know what I'm saying? I mean, not just a historian, but pioneer to bring that to the Houston scene. And bless you for that. Bless you for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, I'm not an expert like yourself or like any of the other incredible artists you mentioned before, but I am an LGBTQ, ally, and I do like all sorts of artistry brought on by the LGBTQ community. Now, there may be some confusion, especially with this younger generation, understanding the difference between a club kid and say like a drag queen artist or drag king artist. Can you explain to them a little bit how it's not so much a separation, but what is the uniqueness between the club kid artistry versus just saying doing a drag queen or drag king persona artistry?
Yeah, so I think that, and this kind of goes back to the whole the party monster thing. So when you look at what happened, the reason that I decided on the title, The Last Club Kid, I'm certainly probably not the last club kid, but the reason that I use that title is I was about 10 years late to the whole club kid movement. So when I started in 96, things were already ending in New York. So the tragic tale that is told in the movie The Party Monster, at some point in time, one of the club kids was murdered in New York. It was very scandalous. And so the term club kid kind of was tainted for and still is to this day. But the difference between a club kid and a drag artist or drag performer, and a lot of drag performers do a club kid style, outfits and things, but a drag illusionist or female illusionist, it's specifically female. My characters as Ghost and many of the club kids characters were ever more on the androgynous side. In other words, we're going to dress as a character, and it's more leaning towards the male or the masculine side. So I think that back in the day, drag performers and club kids were very much integrated, and there was kind of a veer off because of what happened with Angel, and I dedicated my book to, of course, Paloma, who I just mentioned, and also to any of the other performers. But as this story goes, in Party Monster, Michael Alec, the leader of the club kids with Freeze, they murdered Angel, one of the other club kids. And so that stain on the club kid, name and the style was there for years. And a lot of people, would say that the club kid style kind of ended or started to end there. The style is still there. A lot of people still love the platform shoe, love to dress as characters and things. And in the nightclub scene, the DJs and the drag queens were taken over in the club scene and performances and stuff. Club kid style is still out there, but there was a specific movement that worked and flowed with the club scene back in the day. And I would say that was the performance art, not necessarily gender specific, but just more about building a vision of a character and then performing it inside a club, not necessarily by, what you were doing, but just who you were.
And that's something that I think is just very unique about club kids in general. I mean, I didn't get to experience it myself personally, but my first learning of the club kid culture was, from the Hollywood movie Party Monster, and rest in peace, Angel. You're not forgotten. Okay, I'm sorry not to get emotional over here. I'm just a bit crybaby, but rest in peace, Angel.
And I think that was the hardest. The hardest part for me was there's so much irony to it. To me, when I went to Miami Beach. From Houston at the beginning of '97, I didn't know who Gianni Versace was. I didn't know who Angel was. I didn't realize, so I got involved in the club kid scene, thinking that it was still a, moving forward, ongoing movement. And then during my first year as a club kid, 96 to 97, it all crashed. It all came crashing down. And I didn't realize that my bartender, who's mentioned in the book at Heaven, which is now South Beach, the club in Houston, my bartender would wear Versace shirts, and he'd be like, "Look, I paid so and so amount for this," and they were the stylish, very Versace. And I didn't realize until after I got to South Beach what had happened about Versace. And then after that, very shortly after, I found out what happened with Angel. So there's a lot of tragedy there. In the story, but my goal and what I tried to do through my character Ghost, through the different outfits and the different things I did, I tried to be the clown, cheer people up, to help to show that there's more. There can be a happy side. I really want the book to show the side of the club kids where we were fun, we were we were the life of the party, and we definitely showed a bright, vibrant rainbow color side to the club scene.
And like you said, yeah, your outfits, your costumes, even the personas that you created, you know what I'm saying? From my understanding of doing my research, it was always very vibrant, very, happy tones. No one was there showing up to cause a bad time.
So,
Now, unfortunately, there may be some people that aren't into the nightclub culture or club kid culture may see some kind of stigma. They're like, oh, you go to the nightclub and it's nothing but, drugs and things like that.
right.
What advice would you give to explain to people that, about safety, whether they're part of club kid culture or any kind of nightlife culture, to try to maintain safety from substance
Right.
abuse or any violence related to the substance abuse?
Right. So I think that the club kid culture and partaking in substances was very hand in hand. In Miami, I talked about. I'm very open and honest in the book about the trail mix, about the different party supplies and things that we did. I have fought with addiction off and on since those days. I would say this. I would say that even now today, there are certain psychedelics that are used in therapy. Ketamine is now used extensively to treat depression, and certain other products are used therapeutically. So I think that anytime one goes into a recreational situation and is using any substances recreationally, there's a danger of forming addiction there. I do plan on writing a follow-up book to this, and the name of my second book is Anatomy of Addiction. So I do talk a lot about, I don't talk extensively about drug use in the book, but drug use is mentioned in the book in that, it was a part of what was going on at the time. I think there's a danger with anything that using it recreationally, not medicinally, can lead to many, many horrors. And of course, when I went to my first nightclub back in 1986 and 87, MDA was legal. It was not illegal at the time. And so it was a different atmosphere then. And things have just, changed and bubbled so far. But I think that, with anything, you should do your research. You should have a knowledge about it, and you should understand the consequences. Everything has consequences. I paid my price. I have done my price and time, by being arrested and going to jail. I've paid my dues, and at this point in time in my life, I have writing this book has become an outlet to me and allowed me to, maintain my sobriety. I take my sobriety very seriously now. And so I think that for anyone that looks at the book, I'm definitely not glamorizing drug use. I'm definitely, even though the club kid style you think, oh, well, they go hand in hand. Back then, things were different. I'm not glamorizing drug use. I definitely think that and believe in the medicinal use of psychedelics, ketamine, and some, and even marijuana. I believe in those things, but I think that with everyone is different, and the chemical side of addiction is very real, and it affects everyone differently. And so there are parts of my story that should definitely be a tale of caution.
Very well said. Very well said. Yes, and of course, yeah. We're not. No one, Mr. Stevens or myself, is trying to condone doing anything or taking anything like this. Direct. You know what I'm saying. Always talk with your primary care. See what you got to do. You know what I'm saying, and have your support group there to make sure that you make good choices. Now, you mentioned before also. One of the last times you said that you made your presence as a club kid, there was a DEA raid at one of the facilities. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, I around 98 and 98, I was indicted on a DEA charge. I did do that. I did take a year and a half away from the club scene to handle that. I did 6 months house arrest, 6 months probation, and 6 months on in a halfway house in downtown Houston. It's really kind of another ironic thing is the halfway house that I was in for 6 months was off of Cornell Street, just down the street from where around the year 2000, I came back as a promoter. And I was promoting for a club downtown that many known as Kryptonite. At the time, it was known as Club Rehab. Now, I say the name Kryptonite because most people think of Kryptonite. 709 Franklin, when I was coming up, was called Power Tools. And around the year 2000, was done with all of my probation and everything from being in trouble. And I decided that I wanted to bring ghosts back and be a promoter in Houston and do it the right way. So my first party was at a little place that was called Insomnia, and it was called Sanctuary. And then after that party went on for around 6 months, we moved into doing a party at a club called Rehab. And I talk extensively in the book about my time at Club Rehab, working with Chris Allen, Chris Hernandez, and Zach Truesdale. That was where we were. I was a promoter there. I had my own party nights there and was very successful. Around that time, I went to work at Atomic Music. Atomic Music used to be a record store on the corner of Westheimer and Montrose. I worked for DJ Fusion, one of the most iconic DJs in Houston history. And I started promoting a party with him and his wife, Elizabeth, at a club called Valentino's. There was so much going on during this time frame. I hosted raves for Bad Boys. I hosted parties for Charles Solomon and the Spoiled Boys. I was doing all of this, and I found the love of my life and was very settled down. And then on March 17th of 2001, I got a call from a friend of mine that wanted me to bring some party supplies. We'll just leave it at that. To the rave that was going on at the Eyeball Room. I did so. I took some things that were in my pocket, a couple of vials of ketamine, Special K. We'll just say it like that, okay? And I took those. My boyfriend at the time told me, "Stay home, don't go. You shouldn't go." My other friends, it turns out this night that other friends had avoided this place as well. Well, I went into the rave, walked into the room, sat down with the person who called me to bring the stuff there. And when I stood up, my hands were put behind my back, and I was arrested. I was at the height of my career. I was promoting for about 8 different clubs. I was the promotions, and I was doing promotions for Atomic Music, working there on Saturdays. It was one of the biggest mistakes I've ever made. And I did 30 days in Houston jail from that night. That was St. Patrick's Day. I was wearing green 6-inch platform shoes. I was wearing a green outfit. I got arrested and taken to jail in 6-inch platform shoes. Oh my goodness. And next month, that's going to be 25 years to the day that the book comes out. So that's where the timing kind of comes in. So anyway, I say that, I talk about that. So a lot of people online are talking about a rave that happened in 2001 called Transit that was in Houston that the news covered and everything. A lot of people call that the end of the rave scene. Well, HPD got very aggressive after that. And part of that aggression is they had set up tents behind this rave that I got busted at. And they had an entire processing unit. They did a deal where people, for several months prior, anyone who was arrested was offered, if you bring 3 people in, we'll drop the charges on. So someone actually set me up and called me to that rave, and that was the end of my career. Yeah, so I say it now, it's kind of infamous, but to me, I wanted to memorialize and talk about that part because, I mean, I was, I should have stayed home then.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of like the ending of the book. So the book takes you on a wild ride from my early days as Ghost, and then to really what I consider my last day as Ghost at that night at that rave. That's where it all ends.
I mean, I'm sorry you had to get a tough life lesson in that manner. I mean, you're safe now. You've grown from it,
Right.
which is good. But I mean, I'm sorry that it had to happen that way.
And, it's a part of the story. I revel in it today as being part of the story, and I'm very glad that I get to things were so different 25 years ago. Cell phones were not prevalent. There's not a lot of pictures. So I think I have two pictures of me dressed as Club Kid from back then.
Mhm.
But I'm just glad that I'm able to tell this story now and show, the history of some of the nightlife and club scene. And I talk about a lot of venues. I talk about the Eyeball Room, Riches,
Mhm.
Power Tools, Rehab, Heaven, South Beach. I talk about a lot of Houston nightlife. One thing about Houston's nightlife to this day, even through the pandemic, it's very resilient. A lot of nightlife has changed and evolved, but there's a deep history. Houston has a very rich nightlife history.
Now, my next question is it's a little bit of a hot topic, and it's not in any way to say anything negative about first responders or police, government agencies or anything of that nature. I know that their intention is always to serve and protect and do their best, but talking about situations like, back in the 60s with Stonewall, with the gay bar that was raided. And there was stipulation to think that they're just raided because of their sexual orientation. And then you mentioning back in 2000, the experience that you had yourself where they were camped out with a very, much bigger set kind of thing. Do you think that maybe there's a potential that maybe the law enforcement government agencies can learn some kind of sensitivity training or try to get out of the stigma that just because it's this group or that group or that group, we need to have extra scrutiny, that they can try to find a way to better understand these organizations and not just judge them prematurely?
Absolutely. I think that one of my favorite rave flyers, and this is probably from the early 90s, one of my most favorite rave flyers that I ever saw was the flyer has a ravine going down the middle of a forest area. And on one side of the ravine, you have the hippies, the flower children, the ravers with their visors, the club kids, those who, the party side. And on the other side, you had law enforcement. This is an actual flyer. I've been looking for it. I'm going to try and find it one day.
Mm-hmm.
On the other side of the ravine, on the other side, you have law enforcement. You have them in their getup and their uniforms. You have, the sheriffs and the cops. And so I think that the divide came from, I think that the club culture, the party culture has gone through a lot of different waves. And I think that through regulation and things, I think that sometimes, yes, these parties got out of hand. Sometimes things were not safe, and there was a need for a response. But still, in hindsight, should something that has therapeutic purposes be outlawed and illegal? There's just such still a debate that needs to happen in our society about what we legalize and what we don't. And I know that's like way too big of a mountain for, to even cross here. But, I definitely, and I've gone on myself and to kind of relate this to Stonewall, I would say that the rave culture is still out there alive today. The club kid culture, not so much, but I think that responsibility is key. I went on and got my master's degree in counseling, and have actually gone on and been a licensed chemical dependency counselor and done counseling and stuff. I'm a big proponent for harm reduction. In other words, if there's a way for something that is helpful for people or that is enjoyable for them in life, then what's the harm in that?
Exactly. And, we're talking about different decades, advancement in science, advancement in resources, advancements in just cultural thinking in general. It's not to say that, just because they have that uniform, they're a bad person. No, you strip away the uniform,
No,
it's just a
absolutely not.
person.
I know.
And,
And I think that, and I'm still now, I'm a little bit older now, but I have a niece who is, I just went to their wedding in Cabo. My niece married her life partner, who is a female. So I have two nieces now, Allison and Mersada. And so I think that they go to festivals, Bonnaroo and things like that. And I don't know what their we don't talk because, I never had kids of my own. So my nieces and nephews are like kids to me, but I know that some of them microdose and that they're very responsible about how they do and what they do and everything. And so I think that for me, when I say harm reduction, that's what I mean. I mean that, yeah, things were out of hand many times in the past, and there are big festivals now like Electric Daisy Carnival, the Bonnaroo, Burning Man. There are big festivals, and I know that the current generation has a much more responsible way of dealing with their consumption of everything. And so I think that's honorable. This, what I'm put out in the book, pays homage to those of us who laid the groundwork for them to be able to do that.
I love that. I love that. And not to get into too somber of topic, but something that's still very important. You also mentioned before about your experience during the early crisis of the AIDS disease and how that impacted close friends of yours and friends of them and loved ones of them. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So the nightclub in Houston that is currently called South Beach, back in 1986, that club was called Heaven. When I went to, and the building was different back then. It was more of it didn't have the outside patio that it has now. It didn't have the palm trees in front. It was very New York style. It was flat brick square. It was just a square building, and across to the left, and you can find pictures online, across to the left of the door was the word Heaven painted. When you walked in, right inside the front door was a video bar that had 6 video screens around, and it was a octagon bar in the middle of the room. And so it was a video bar because videos were the big thing back then. It was the launch of MTV, and videos were, just the thing at the time. So when I went there the first time at 16, the AIDS crisis was just barely starting to happen. When I went there a couple of years later, the way that I remember, and the best way that I like to describe to the younger generation, is imagine going into a club that previously was packed with all types of ages. And when you go back in 2 years, there's no one from the age of 30 to 50.
Wow.
Wiped out, gone. So my experience was going in, and there were a few, but just to kind of emphasize the impact, an entire generation of that culture was wiped out. And there's, that's something that can never be forgotten. Harvey Firestein does a great job of memorializing that and keeping the quilt alive and everything. I was able at the age of 18 to volunteer on the Gay and Lesbian Switchboard in Houston. I also volunteered at KPFT for the Friday night show. And so for me, that's the way that I frame of reference it. And I have some close friends that I grew up with that were affected by this. So I've been around it my whole life. God, I've been blessed that I did not have to deal with that. But it is certainly the best way I can describe it is no one, and I know I'm being specific about saying it, but literally it was like either they're very young or very old. There was an entire generation in between that was basically gone, and very sampled, kind of sampled in there were couples. There were some couples that in that age group that was not affected by it, but an entire generation wiped out. That's what it was like.
And back in the 80s, early 90s, we're talking about a time when, there's still no cure for it to this day, but we're talking about even less resources that were made available. Medical practitioners were just barely coming out with studies trying to understand how to treat this kind of thing. And one person in particular, I have to look at my crib notes over here. We had a fellow activist here from Dallas, Texas. His name, Mr. Rod Woodruff. He explains a story about his experience contracting the virus and how he fought back tooth and nail with local law enforcement and government agencies, hospitals, to try to advocate for more resources to make available to treat this disease. And he started his own, what he called Dallas Buyers Club, in which to help to give free resources to people. because whether gay, lesbian, straight, whatever they want, anybody, the whole point of his movement was everybody deserved the right to live a healthy lifestyle. Did you know anybody that personally or friends that, were trying to find alternative resources like this to try to help with bringing awareness or to support fighting that type of disease?
Yeah, I had to look it up real quick because I wanted to make sure that I didn't misrepresent. But I actually went to college in Dallas. So I lived in Dallas. Of course, I mentioned earlier my very first rave was in Deep Elm back in the early 90s. But when I was living and going to college in Waxahachie, one of my friends who was my age and was in my early 20s at the time, his uncle was staying with his mother, and his uncle was gay, and we would go and visit him, and the uncle was barely 93 pounds and had a really bad, it was called Kaposi sarcoma. Kaposi sarcoma was one of the most visible, diagnosis that came along. Of course, HIV, and it's very well known, and people are so educated. I'm so happy that people are educated about this. Back then, not so much, but HIV, of course, lowers the T cells, and the T cells, when they drop below a certain number, that's when someone is formally diagnosed with acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. So his uncle had this, and we were very compassionate with his uncle, and we would always make sure that even though people were like, "Oh, don't touch it," we would go and we would touch his arms, where and just be very affectionate to him and things. And so that was one of the closer things. I didn't know as much about what was going on with Dallas Buyers Club and everything until after it happened. But being in Dallas, I did experience firsthand being close to someone who was affected by some of the worst symptoms.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
Thank you.
I'm so sorry to
It was
hear
an
that.
eye-opener. It was an eye-opener. And again, these are experiences that are priceless.
Indeed. And for those that don't know, Rod Woodruff was a reportedly heterosexual man, and unfortunately he
Right.
contracted this disease. And the story goes that he befriended a trans woman who also was fighting with the disease, and together they decided to put their differences aside about stigmas of I don't hang out with you or I don't hang out with you, and they started forming
Right.
all these kind of groups all over to try to offer resources and help for people with that disease, and that was very honorable.
Right. Right. Because as the story goes, that one of the early treatments for HIV was actually the ACT treatments. Some of the early treatments actually made the symptoms worse. And so I know the story well. I wasn't as connected to it, but it definitely, it was something that, I grew up in that time period, and having my friend, whose uncle who just deteriorated and withered away, was very sad during that time.
And condolences to anyone who's ever had to experience that, suffer from that, loved one with that. You know what I'm saying? We only wish you to find the proper resources to help you with that. Everyone deserves medical treatment. Everyone deserves to live a healthy lifestyle. Does not matter what your personal life is going on. Everybody deserves that. Okay. And you're just going to have to forgive me because I'm just a little sappy Sally over here.
No, I completely, and I'm glad. It's so honored. I'm so honored to have allies such as you, someone who has compassion. That's what the world needs more of right now, is compassion for one another. And so it's honorable, it's admirable, and it's so nice to see you have such a big heart for our community.
Now, I mean, since I can remember, I mean, I didn't grow up with this belief of, okay, by the way, if you run into two men's or two women's, understand that this is what they're called and this is what theirs called. That's not how I was brought up. It was like, okay, sometimes you might run into couples that are two men, two women, a man, a woman, and that's just whatever. You treat people correctly. It wasn't until maybe I was like in middle school or high school that I first heard the term gay, lesbian, trans, whatever. I was like, okay, well, what difference does it make if they're having a consensual, happy relationship? That's fine. I don't see the big deal of separation.
Harm reduction. I'm all about harm reduction. If it's something that, and Sheryl Crow saying it best, if it makes you happy, it can't be that bad.
That part.
Right.
And so your memoir is going to be published, like you said, on the 25th anniversary next month in March.
Yeah.
And it'll be available on Amazon and in paperback and hard copy. Is that correct?
Yes. So we're not doing a hard copy. We're doing paperback. We may do a hard copy down the line. So right now, we have our book release, books signing at Brazos Bookstore over in Southwest Houston. The book signing is on March 17th at 6:30. And I'll be doing an additional appearance on Houston Matters on PBS that morning on the 17th. And then on the 21st, that Saturday, we will be having a book release party somewhere off of Washington Avenue. I can't release the venue because it's a brand new venue that the gentleman I mentioned earlier. So it's going to be a reunion of sorts on the 21st from 6 to 10. My house DJs that were my DJs when I was the promoter during that time back in 2000, DJ Nuts and DJ Alibi, are going to be spinning. I've invited some of the Houston original club kids to host the party with me. And it's going to be at a new venue that has just been taken over by none other than Chris Allen, the gentleman who was the owner of Club Rehab back in the day that I mentioned. So it's going to be a reunion of sorts. And so the book release party is coming up. So the week of the 17th, which happens to be spring break, the week there on St. Patrick's Day, that day, we're going to be doing the book signing at Brazos Bookstore. The book is available for pre-order on Amazon Kindle right now, and you can order a paperback there, or I will have links on my website. All of my socials are The Last Club Kid, at The Last Club Kid for everything, and then the website is www.thelastclubkid.com.
Oh, how exciting. Oh my goodness. And I'm definitely good. As long as I'm not working, I'm going to be at that book release party. You're going to see a familiar face. I can't wait.
Yes,
And it'll be
I've invited.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I've invited one of my proteges, one of my Club Kid proteges, who actually came and hosted parties with me at the club. I owned a nightclub with Keoki in Houston called the Loki Lounge back in 2014, and one of my Club Kid proteges, I've invited them to do the interview at the book signing, and so we're still talking about that. So there's lots of exciting special. I also invited one of my hosts who hosted the parties at Club Rehab with me. They haven't RSVP'd yet, so I can't announce it yet. But I've also invited them to do the book party with me. So there's lots of people who were a part of what goes on in the book are going to be helping me with these events.
Wonderful. Oh, how exciting. Now, so living that you've seen, some part of the beginning, the middle, and I guess the upbringing of the club kid culture kind of thing, and you've been a proud activist of the LGBTQ and community for all this time. What kind of advice would you give to not just LGBTQ community folks, but anyone in general? What kind of advice would you give them to try to live their authentic self and just to be happy in their own skin and to just keep persevering forward and not let, the stigma or the negative stuff going around them affect them?
I think that each and every one of us has an idea of who our authentic self is. Letting that shine out, so there's a couple of things in the book. There's a lot of isms that I created as my own club kid, and one of them that I talk about Klingons, add-ons, and roll-ons in the book. I talk about plur, peace, love, unity, respect. I talk a lot about different things. Who you are on the inside. You were born into that and live your life, oftentimes being told what you can't be or what you shouldn't be. There's a couple of things that I live by. I've lived, and RuPaul, who I'm a huge fan of, always loved RuPaul. RuPaul, yes, who isn't, is considered, and RuPaul will say it a lot, and there are videos online. RuPaul is a club kid, and a drag queen club kid. So, but RuPaul says that when you get to your 50s, that life really, settles in, and you can be really who you are. And this is coming from someone who's done that their whole life. I think that explore, make mistakes, and live life. That's some of the early feedback I got about the book was, oh, wow, you've really lived a full life. And I have. And I think that's why it was so important for me to detail the book and to put it all into the book. But I think be your true authentic self no matter what. There's an old saying that I never have agreed with. Keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. I don't want to be friends with my enemies. So I've always been different than people than that. If there's somebody, it's okay not to like people. You're not going to get along with people. Someone who's I consider a friend today was my arch nemesis back in the day. Monday, I talk about in the book, was kind of hard on me when I came out as a club kid. Like, she would literally, and he would say, what is that? Did you grab that out of a dumpster to wear it? Reading me and stuff. It's all light and fun. I would say that, I had to grow a thick skin pretty fast going through all that and through all those experiences. But you know who you are, be your authentic self, and stand your ground no matter what those around you may say. If they point out flaws and you agree with those, then fix the flaws. If they point out flaws and you don't agree with them, then leave those flaws in place because they're your flaws.
That part. That part. Okay. We all come in different shapes, colors, and sizes, geography, backgrounds, kind of things, you know what I'm saying? But if you're not Dahmer, Gacy, Bundy, you're doing a pretty good job. You're probably pretty rad. You know what I'm saying?
Agreed.
So,
Agreed.
Love yourself. You need to love yourself more.
Yeah. Know thyself, love thyself, and don't be afraid to be your true authentic self. And if you have, I'm gonna just put it to you real simple how I became a club kid. I became a club kid, and I have the right to say. Now, there's not a lot of people in this world who can truly say they were a club kid. I have that right because I did something about it. I saw them on a talk show. I said, I want to do that. And I went and I did it. I created an outfit. I bought platform shoes. I put the makeup on. I created a name. I created a character. And then I took that character on a journey that I would not. I got to meet Prince. I got to be in nightclubs with Madonna. I never got to meet Madonna, but I got to. But the performers in actual Miami Beach that I got to get to know, Paloma, Connie Casserole, Daisy Dead Petals, Kitty Meow. I mean, the performers in South Beach in '97, the nightclubs there, Glam Slam, Warsaw Ballroom, the Delano, the Lucky 13. One of the, I'll just want to add this one story and kind of like, when the Florida Marlins won the 1997 World Series, I'm the one that hosted their celebration at the Lucky 13. You just don't get to do those. That's just, it's insane. There's so many other stories like that in the book. I hope everyone reads the stories and enjoys them, and then has some inspiration from what I was able to do in the book, and then get out and live life.
Oh, yes. Yes. I mean, I've been watching things like RuPaul's Drag Race show since it first aired. And I remember distinctly where I was when I first heard that it was going to be on the air. And I was like, oh my God, I'm living in history. The first time I can remember that there's going to be a platform for LGBTQ artists, drag king artists, and no one's sneering about it. It's not as a joke, it's a real platform for them. And
it's everywhere now. It's mainstream. I love it.
Yes.
I love it. I'm a huge fan.
Yes.
Huge fan. I sent a copy of my book to Michelle Visage last week, hoping that that she'll read it. The mother to the drag queens and the club kids, and Michelle Visage also, very much someone that I like to. So yeah, it's mainstream now. It's big. It's huge, and let's not forget the people that brought it to you, club kids.
Okay. Don't worry about your sexual orientation, your birth that you were assigned, again, your geographical background. If you want to bring art, bring it.
Exactly. Do it. Nothing's holding you back but you.
Well, do you have any last bit of advice for the listeners?
No, I just, hey, I did want to ask you. So you said that back in the day so the club that was my first club, Heaven, which became South Beach, that you have some fond memories. I'd love to hear a little bit about, your experiences at South Beach. So I just, because I know in our initial conversation, you brought that up. That was where I literally at 16 walked into my very first club. So same location, different name. Let's hear about it.
So yeah, I was doing the club scene in about the mid 2000 kind of things, like 2006 2007. Again, like my whole life never was like, oh, okay, if you see this together, they're gay, they're straight, it was never like that. I grew very close to the LGBTQ community just because I just loved that everybody was just family, this community. It was acceptance of no matter what color, shape, size, whatever. So of course, the first time I was out to go to the club, I was like, I want to go to the neighborhood. I want to go to Montrose. I want to go to South Beach. I want to go to Crocker Bar. I want to go to Ripcord. I want to go to Blur. But South Beach was one of the first ones I went to, and I got to see the bubble party, the foam parties that they had. I don't like to call myself straight or heterosexual because I just think it's irrelevant. I'm just like, I enjoy the relationship of men, but who cares? You know what I'm saying? Like it, if you want to call me straight, fine. If you want to call me this, fine. I don't care. Just know I have,
and a very club kid thing to say to that would be, you enjoy the company of men, and so do I. That would be I hate to jump in there, but that would be such a club kid thing to say. Would be, oh my goodness, girl, you enjoy the company of men, so do I.
Yes. I mean, because love is love, honey. And that was the thing that brought me to what I like to call the neighborhood, to South Beach, is that it was very accepting. I went in there, no one was like, yeah, I might get read, be like, girl, did you wear that brown with black? But that was the extent of it. They're more or less to say like, no, that's a fashion faux pas. It wasn't like you don't belong here because you're not this, that, the other. And so that's what I liked about going there. Very accepting.
That's been the same since back in 1989, the first time that I stepped foot through the door. 1986, 86 when I walked through the door for the first time. Still very the same. Still very accepting. You might get read if right after Labor Day. Careful, but it's still it's all out of love for sure.
Yes, I mean, and to this day, I can't go in Montrose without running into somebody, and I call them my rainbow family, my little gay babies. I'm like, here, I don't have a purse big enough, but hop in there. I'm taking you with me. We're going all around town. Okay, we're gonna kiki. We're gonna read. We're gonna do whatever we want. You know what I'm saying? If you want to identify as heterosexual, that's fine. I'm like, everybody's okay. It's just sometimes going into these what they call straight bars, clubs, you notice people like, well, you're not in this, so I can't hang out with you. I never had that experience at South Beach, Blur, Ripcord, and Crocker Bar, especially one of my favorite places of all time. And I grew up with the 80s style of music, so I love the music. I love to dance. I never had a bad time. It was always great vibes.
And that's really when you responded to my initial email. I definitely wanted to hear that. That is so cool to hear. So
I owe it to pioneers like yourself and other activists that are trying to explain the words that yes, we may be LGBTQ, that may be what we're calling today, but and I hope this is not a trigger, and I hope this doesn't sound offensive to yourself or anyone else who's watching, but I hope one day that we can come to a world where it's like you don't have to call yourself gay, straight, bi, this. You can just be like, okay, well, we're gonna go see your Uncle Bob and your Uncle Richard. Okay, Mary and Lucy are getting married. Let's go to the wedding, and it not even be a thing.
You're so on point here. That I was reading an article just last week where the mother was talking about that the son. If they had a son or daughter who happened to be attracted to someone of the same sex, that it should be so natural to them that they shouldn't feel the need to come out. When they find a partner, that they should be able to come home and say, hey, this is Scott, this is my boyfriend. And regardless, there should be and there should be no need to identify with anything, but only a desire to be.
Exactly. I don't mean to take away from anyone's identity per se, you know,
Right.
nothing like that
No,
at all,
you're-
but I just,
You're on point. You're on point, for sure.
you should be able to love without having to categorize your file cabinet, your spice cabinet, maybe your CD collection, your vinyls,
Right.
your sexuality, who you are as a person. Just be that. You
Yeah.
be that. Okay.
There's a fun
All right.
story in the book. There's a fun story in the book from, I believe it's in the chapter called First Season, where actually I was doing some activism in the club. I carried a little Dymo label maker around with me, and I labeled everyone in the club. And I did that as a performance art project. And I know we're getting towards the end here, but I did that just kind of as a point. Hey, we need to lose the labels and just enjoy life.
Just enjoy life.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Love is love. Art is art. Ain't no one judging you but you, maybe. And you need to be nicer to
Love
yourself.
your neighbor, love yourself.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. On the same page.
It's okay to hold yourself to high standards, to want to always do better. But remember, you're pretty metal. You're pretty damn metal. Okay. And fierce, honey. Well, thank you so much, Mark, for joining us today.
Thank you. It's been very enjoyable. I thank you so much for having me. I look forward to the future of the element, many years to come.
Likewise. And thank you, everyone who's been listening today. I hope you have a better sense of feeling of yourself. If you ever had a moment where you felt unsure, you felt down, I hope you listen to Ghost's words and remember that you are that one. You are art. You are unique, and you deserve all the love and respect.
Absolutely.
And excuse
Thank you, Missy. I'm glad you're not wearing eyelashes or eye makeup today. I'm glad you're not. It would have melted.
I know it. I know. That's why I can't. Because I'm too much of a sassy Sally. But you know, it's just because I have a big heart. I have so room for so much.
100%. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure is all mine. Thank you. And thank you all so much for joining us today. We'll talk to you guys next time. Peace.